Really glad to have the opportunity to introduce Alexander Weinstein, who was here last night and spoke after the screening of the film After Yang. Alexander's story, Saying Goodbye to Yang, appeared in this book called Children of the New World. And that story got worked up into a film that has a lot of relevance to our theme about Robot101. Yes, 3,000 students, just for reading Clara and the Sun, and Alexander and I were talking about the connection there with that book. Today, Alexander's going to talk to us about the role that imaginative fiction play in discussing moral issues about technology. So really happy to have Alexander with us. He's coming from Ann Arbor, has a position in creative writing at Siena Heights University, and we're very happy to have him. So I'll turn it over.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Great. So thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with you all today. And my talk today, I've been reading a lot of lyric essays recently. And so if you're not familiar with the Lyric Essay Forum, it's a forum that breaks all the rules of essay writing. I thought I'd do a lyric speech that is in parts about where we find ourselves with robotics, what role that all plays in my fiction, and how I've used creative writing to dive into this. So one, where do you get your stories from? This is a question that I get a lot as an author. Where do I get my stories from? So I'll begin with a kind of inventory, a list of what might inspire my speculative fiction collected from our dystopian reality. The World Climate Report issued this past August has informed us that we will have passed the point of no return within a couple years, after which saving ourselves from ecological collapse will be beyond reach. It warns that if we do not radically change our way of living, we can expect more droughts, devastating flooding, and the kinds of extreme weather events that we've seen worldwide. The floods that wrecked Europe, China, and India, the toxic smoke plumes which covered Siberia, the wildfires burning out of control in US, Canada, Greece, and Turkey. Projections show Copenhagen, Stockholm, and most of the eastern and western coastlines of America underwater. The Statue of Liberty's port perhaps reaching the crests of the waves. Danish writer and politician Ida Auken wrote an article published in Forbes and later highlighted during the World Economic Forum entitled, "Welcome to 2030, I Own Nothing." It was a piece of speculative fiction and also a techno-political blueprint which outlines a future subscription culture where we will own nothing. In this utopian vision, all will be provided to us. Cookingware, bicycles, cars, goods and services delivered by drones in a circular economy. The idea is highlighted by the World Economic Forum as number 2 prediction for our future. And they imagine a world where all goods will be turned into services. We will own nothing, simply be subscribed to, let's imagine, an Amazon lifestyle. Cooking pots and the latest chefware will be delivered to our door by drones for a monthly or weekly subscription service. In Auken's essay, she predicts that AIs will do all our work for us, leaving us to live metropolitan lives, giving us time to eat well, sleep well, spend time with other people. Few worries about the people who do not live in the city, those lost along the way who decided all this technology was too much, who felt, as she writes, obsolete and useless when the robots took over. They live different lives outside the city, and she envisions them in small, self-supplying communities living in empty and abandoned houses in 19th century-like villages. I think about these villages. I imagine the people there must sometimes look to the sky when they hear the swarms of buzzing drones bringing all those products over their heads. I imagine they must have trouble sleeping at night or hearing the crickets singing in summer or the birds at dawn. I wonder about all the electricity that will be needed. If the community gardens, ceremonial plazas, and burial grounds of the starving villages will soon be seen as part of the city's dominion for all the solar fields and wind turbines. I wonder about the pit mining of cobalt and precious metals required for all that technology. The essay doesn't cover what might happen when one can no longer afford to pay for our subscription services. So I wonder about the Amazon police forces that'll be needed to retrieve the latest chef knives and IKEA furniture that I can no longer pay rent on. As for those living in the city, I quote from her essay, which sounds eerily like the nostalgic laments of my own tech-addicted characters. Sometimes I use my bike when I go to see my friends. I enjoy the exercise and the ride. It kind of gets the soul to come along on the journey. Once in a while, I cook for myself. Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg have known for a long time that its algorithms cause major political, social, and human rights violations, including genocide and the overthrowing of major elections, including one that put Trump in office. The company has systematically hidden what it knows. This is public information. I read it on Facebook. Meanwhile, Zuckerberg just gave a sneak peek of the metaverse he's creating, a completely virtual world where the moment we don our glasses, we can have space pads and underwater apartments with the most glorious vistas out our windows. All of this will be provided as a subscription service. Soon we'll be able to subscribe to an ethereal world where we'll use our hard-earned cryptocurrency to buy cartoon versions of houses, art on the walls, perhaps even friends. Life, I imagine, will seem utopian until our subscription runs out and we find ourselves in our small, empty, box-like apartments with blank walls, our virtual cookware gone, our real cookware being picked up by Amazon police for non-payment. The mega-rich launch battling rockets. Jeff Bezos spends $5.5 billion to spend 4 minutes in space. The price would almost cover the low estimates needed for ending world hunger. A number of commenters have noted that the rocket ships look oddly like dildos. Before we forget those post-industrial villages where the technologically deprived are drone gazing at night, and perhaps planting community gardens during the day, I'm reminded of an amazing poem that I tried to teach my freshman students about planting community gardens. After reading Ross Gay's ode, an unabashed catalog of gratitude, one of my students was confused. As she wrote in her response, and I quote, "The poem is kind of confusing. He talks a little like using old school language like wheelbarrows and pitchforks. I am getting early 1990s vibes," which reminds me of another student who asked me what it was like before 9/11, the time before he was born. He wanted to know about the strange world of the 1980s, before we had cars, he said, or landlines. Meanwhile, a sex robot brothel has opened in Japan. Its website offers sex dolls, including categories such as teen, flat-chested, European, MILF, ebony, and anime. I think about that MILF sex robot. Who are her kids? How are they doing? Where do they go to school while their mother is at work in the brothel? Do they ever need oil? The brothel recently added male sex dolls following a demand for bisexual threesomes. Users can choose what the dolls will be wearing. Options include basic lingerie, schoolgirl outfit, fitness gear, or executive woman. I was never good at Tinder or OkCupid. I had too many qualms about learning the most basic commands. To use those apps well, you had to agree to swipe people into the garbage. The world undergoes complete shutdown. The pandemic is so devastatingly shocking that for a moment, the entire world holds still. For a week, the skies clear. Dolphins and whales return to the waterways. The Himalayas are visible again. Wolves walk the streets of San Francisco. A man plays a trumpet solo of Imagine from an Italian balcony. And we all weep. For a moment, it seems as though we might have complete global unity. Then we begin fighting about toilet paper. So you see my problem, right? As a dystopian writer, I'm going to be out of a job soon. 2, when realism becomes speculative fiction. My first collection, Children of the New World, was written as a kind of warning. I was getting worried about where we were headed, and this happened right around 2010. My students were all getting iPhones, and they were all talking about how much they loved their iPhones. This was a word that I hadn't heard before around technology. People were essentially falling in love with their phones. They said it was the last thing that they looked at before they went to sleep at night, the first thing that they looked at in the morning. Essentially, they were talking about their iPhones as one used to write love poetry. So my stories became a kind of parable, asking us not to go there. I wrote the stories to be warnings. But over the past 10 years, I find my predictions are all coming true. In turn, even though I'm writing speculative fiction, I'm ending up just writing about reality. When I look at the plots of my short stories, it's crazy how much these actually just sound like realism. In Migration, a society ends up inside all the time, communicating only through online medium. Children go to school online. People make love online. Everyone is scared to leave their houses. In We Only Wanted Their Happiness, parents struggle with the new implants, which allow children to connect to invisible worlds that their parents can no longer see or control access to. Recently, Elon Musk announced that Neuralink will allow us to get implants that will let human consciousness, as we know, become obsolete. In my story, The Year of Nostalgia, holograms become a way of connecting with lost loved ones. A couple years after I write it, Whitney Houston's hologram goes on a sold-out tour. In Beijing, individuals can edit their memories through blasts of light, and the new clubbing drug is a form of neurosurgery that lets you delete the traumas you can't seem to get over. Recently, neuroscientists have learned to use light to specifically remove memories in mice. They hypothesize that this might lead to a new form of therapy known as brain editing. So, speculative fiction, it turns out, might be a more realistic predictor of our present reality than realism. In fact, it's occurred to me how much our supposedly realistic mediums became a kind of alternate reality fantasy during our pandemic. In contemporary advertisements, literature, and film, we saw a maskless populace socializing, going to parties, living life as though the pandemic never occurred. So what we got was an alternate reality where no one worried about COVID, a sci-fi parallel universe very much like our own, but far, far away. These fictions invited us into a collective fantasy, which worries me, because when realism purports to tell us a real story about the world, but does so by ignoring the lived reality of our daily lives, it becomes another genre of fantasy, a revisionist history at worst, at best, a form of escapism, more fantastical than tales of traveling to Mars. 3, a short reading. Since you may not be familiar with my work, I'm going to read just the beginning of 2 stories that have been optioned to become films. And this is from my first collection, Children of the New World. This is from The Cartographers. Publicly, we sold memories under Quimbley, Barrett, and Woods. But when it was just the three of us working late into the night, we thought of ourselves as map makers. There was something nautical about the loft we'd rented, the massive oak beams and triangular plate glass windows that stood like a sail at the end of the room. In the day, it revealed the tar-papered roofs of neighboring apartment buildings. And at night, it framed the illuminated Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan skyline. We called it the Crow's Nest, and we were the captains, lording over the memories of the world as we drew our maps into our program. Here was the ocean, here the ships, here the hotel, here the path that led to town, here the street vendors, here the memories of children we never had, and parents much better than the ones we did. And far out there was the edge of the world. What happens when you get to the edge? You fall off, we joked. Early on, there were many edges. They existed within our restaurants and hotels, as well as the borders of our cities. Most of our hotel rooms were well charted. You open the drawer, you'd find a Bible, take the painting down, and there'd be more wall. But behind the closed doors of neighboring rooms, there was nothing but white light. There are, of course, the Japanese maximalists like the legendary Taka Shimazaki, who designs every carpet fiber of every hotel room to avoid any edges. But what Quimbley, Barrett, and I found was that most people trust memories like they trusted films. You beam a movie between your eyes and you remember the plot in vivid detail. You don't wonder where a sidekick's parents live. When you beam a vacation, you remember swimming at the beach, caipirinhas and coconut shells, not the unexplored outskirts of town. Granted, if a tourist tried to remember swimming far enough, say past the ships, had they gone further than the edge of a town, up a highway, stepped onto the dirt roads at the edge of the map, they'd see that place where the ground ended and the white light began, but people were happy with their memories. What they wanted was a family trip that went well. They wanted the feeling of skydiving to tingle their bones. They didn't care about the rivets and bolts of the plane they jumped from. They merely wanted to remember that the pilot's name was Chip, that he patted them on the back, that he said, "Nice jump." What the populace wanted, what they will always want, what they still want is pulp cybernetics. Maybe not as cheap as the corner store memories China is producing, $8.99 porn thrills, so poorly constructed, you can see the patches of light where the software burns through the girl's skin. But give them palm trees, a restaurant with an attractive server, coral reefs, sand dollars for the kids. You got a package that retails for $79.99. Children of the New World. Sometimes when evening comes and the light hits our home in a way that reminds us of that other life, we'll talk about them. What their faces look like, the feeling of their weight in our arms, the way our youngest would crawl onto my back. I'll see Mary sitting alone in our living room, the sun gone, just the reds of dusk outlining the trees, and I know she's remembering them. I walk over, put my arms around her, kneel by her, and place my head in her lap, and we'll stay like that, holding one another's pain, wondering whether we are truly monsters. They weren't real, we say, looking for confirmation, right? Right. Then we get up, start dinner, and move on with our childless lives. For those of us who became parents in those first years, we remember the awe and beauty of the new world. To lie down in the darkness of the compartment, adjust the pillow beneath our heads, and log on was tantalizing. The chamber's darkness gave way to the light of the other world, the white walls of our online home appearing before us, filling our teeth with electric joy. We recall the first steps we took in our new house. To reach out and touch the world was to be illuminated. And we walked outside to see the homes lined up along our streets, shining anew, other users emerging from doorways, waving as they crossed their lawns to make introductions. Isn't this incredible? Where are you using from? Las Cruces, Copenhagen, Austin? We were like babies, like Adam and Eve, some said. We reached out toward each other to see how skin felt. We let our neighbors' hands run across our arms. In this world, we seemed to understand we were free to experience a physical connection that we'd always longed for in the real world but had never been able to achieve. Who can blame us for being reckless? Perhaps such thoughts seem childish now in light of all that happened, but it's often those first weeks of usage when the world was still new that Mary and I speak of most, when we remind ourselves that life was good. It was just a beautiful illusion, we tell each other. A fantastic electronic diversion, right? Right, we say. Mary's pregnancy took us both by surprise. She had gone through menopause a decade earlier, and we'd resigned ourselves to living childless lives. We'd waited too long, had debated the pros and cons too many times, had placed our jobs first, and then it was too late. It was only when Mary's belly began to swell that we accessed the frequently asked questions tab. It was all there, no great mystery. Pregnancy worked the same as in the real world, fully explained in the tutorial. We had planned to watch the walkthrough at some point, had gotten as far as the instructions to roll our thoughts to the left to select our tattoos and piercings, up and down for musculature and age. But then we began playing with landscapes and playlists. Before we knew it, we had the basics of navigation down. This is how you upload music to the home speakers. This is how you project your photos onto the living room wall. This is how you place one hand on your wife's hips. This is how she puts her hand behind your neck. This is how you kiss. And then she was pregnant. The frequently asked questions informed us we could remove an unwanted pregnancy as easily as dragging a file to the recycle bin, but we were curious. Here would be another being formed by the combination of our genome preferences. The birth promised to be as quick and painless as a download. So we held each other, scrolled through online baby names, and agreed to bring new life into this world. In the new world, Mary and I proved to be a completely different couple. Our bodies became freed from habit. Independent of hormonal changes, we grew hungry for the electric hum of each other. Mary soon became pregnant again, and our lives were illuminated in a way we thought impossible in the physical world. Online, with our new family, we'd found joy. 4, the emotional why of speculative fiction. So my stories begin with a what if. What if our online dating became even more horrific than it presently is? What if we purchased sentient robotic children and they began to use drugs like regular teenagers? What if the world became flooded from global warming and a father and son were stranded on a small island with diving gear, exploring the drowned world below? These what ifs conjure vast landscapes, and part of the pleasure of writing is world building. And yet, I found that my speculative fiction can't simply rely on a premise, or it risks sacrificing my characters. For my stories to succeed, they have to go deeper than simply the what if plot. They need to explore the hearts of the characters. And to achieve this goal, I have to intertwine something purely realistic that I care deeply about. My own fears, my hopes, my dreams. This doesn't merely deepen the story, it deepens the mystery of the writing process. Because the what ifs suddenly take on new lives as much more meaningful metaphors. A story about children getting cybernetic brain implants to telepathically access the internet suddenly becomes a way to speak about my struggles of limiting my own children's screen time. Holographic parents reveal a truth about the mystery of my own parents and the importance of connecting deeply with the people I love. And a father and son diving for buried treasure is secretly also a tale of watching my teenage son prepare to sail away to college and the treasures of our life that I hope he takes with him. In many ways, I'm always writing autobiography. So speculative fiction allows me to write about my own life through a kind of dreamlike metaphor. And it's vital to me that I don't understand the metaphor that I'm writing about. I simply follow the ground situation. I build the speculative world, and I use the logic of world building. And as this plays out, it plays out in really unexpected ways. When I write about diving to a drowned world, I'm also writing without realizing about trying to salvage a relationship during my son's teenage years. And to do this well means risking my heart again and again. It requires vulnerability, because as much as I'd like to write about the beauty of parenthood, I've failed in the battle against my son's data usage. And we've had the 21st century teenage fights that all parents have these days. And right alongside my memories of these fights are memories of a snowy Michigan day when I found cross-country skis at a thrift store, and my son and I set out together through the woods, huffing and happy as we struggled to learn how to ski together. And maybe there's a secret there of how my subconscious mind works. Maybe rather than skiing, we were diving together that day. And so the writing process is a constant back and forth between moments of grace and fears of losing my human connection. Because within the dark political frontiers of our increasingly digitized reality, there's also a great wealth of human kindness. It's present when we gather together to listen to musicians at concerts or in a conversation like this, on the hugs of our friends and family. Beneath the robots, holographic parents, virtual reality love-making couples of my speculative fiction worlds, my stories are parables of life. And the challenge for me has always been to give my fiction a piece of what I hold sacred. Sometimes it's fatherhood, kindness, compassion. Other times it's the vulnerability of heartbreak, of grief, of the nostalgia of parenthood, where one day your child is holding your hand and the next they're waving goodbye. These are the hearts of my characters, and the work of every story I write is to risk such truths in my fiction. This is how speculative fiction becomes a form of emotional realism. Because while my stories grow from the soil of warnings, they're also watered by a deeply utopian idea that we can care for each other more deeply, that we can love one another more fully, and that we can work together to make this world a better place. 5, epilogue, or afterthoughts for a utopian speculative fiction. When my friends send me the latest articles on implanted brain chips or robotic sex dolls, I begin to wonder if I'm helping to create the very future that I'm hoping to avoid. Another way of saying this. After all his years of studying human spirituality and consciousness, the Buddhist teacher Ram Dass said he'd come to this realization. What we do as human beings is create atmospheres for each other. That's all we can do. If this is true, what kind of atmospheres do I want my fiction to create? Or, to say it another way, sound affects molecules, creating vibrations and patterns within vowel and consonant sounds. Word choice then becomes a kind of instrumentation, the orchestras of which are our poems, stories, and novels. Our personal consciousness affects word choice, and so our sentences are vibrated by that frequency, and in turn, readers are vibrated by those sentences when they read them inside their minds. If this is true, what kind of concerts am I giving? Or said simply, if speculative fiction can create worlds that we don't yet believe in, what are our present hopes that we can't yet let ourselves believe? If my stories have been dealing in the terrain of prophetic futures, then what futures do I want to help sculpt? I'm beginning to write stories with new what ifs. What if there was a world where we have collectively awoken from our digital sleep? What if tourists visited planets where they listen to craters, sing songs of enlightenment, and make it really hard to return to Earth and watch reruns of the Kardashians? What if there was an escape room where we tried to escape from the habitual patterns that have kept us trapped, reincarnating for eons with our same anxieties and hangups? And just as readers once might have thought that the sex robots or lives lived completely online in virtual worlds were unbelievable dreams, and yet here we are, what if there's a world where we learn how to love each other more fully? A future where we care for nature's ongoing existence, a place, maybe now, where we finally heal. Thank you. All right, so that gives us hopefully some stuff to talk about. And if you have questions, want to talk about sex robots in Japan, anything, writing process, etc. Happy to field them. Yeah.
What other dystopian like futures have like you been interested in, like based a novel off like a Blade Runner, Cyberpunk, Akira? There's a bunch of like futuristic dystopian and I was just wondering if those were any inspirations.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I tend to write what will be classified, I think, as sci-fi or certainly speculative fiction. Yet I read almost none of it. Only last year I read Dune for the first time, so I don't have that history in it. I think Blade Runner certainly was somewhere back there, right? That has this very cyberpunk aesthetic. Really, probably the people that I was more influenced by were people like Kafka, with the metamorphosis and waking up as a bug and like the weird wonky worlds of that. Like that I really like. I love this sort of idea that our lives are going to pretty much look like we are familiar with them, and not quite as dystopian as like a cyberpunk future. Yeah. But it's slowly but surely going to like seep in there. This cyberpunk is going to sneak in there in ways that we don't even know. Yeah. So reading now I saw, now I'm watching a lot more sci-fi, and I think shows like Black Mirror was, really inspirational and very much in conversation with the work. Mm-hmm. And Tales from the Loop is another one that I think is just brilliant. I love Tales from the Loop. So that's starting to inspire my fiction now. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of going off with what he asked. Do you ever look at like any other media after you like write a story and you go, oh, maybe it won't be as bad as I think it's going to be, or as I wrote?
No. I mean, I want to. You know what did that for me? The movie Her. I think Her gave me a little bit of an idea of like, there's this one scene in the movie Her where somebody falls down. I think the main character falls down. He's running and he falls down, and then like immediately somebody walking near tries to help him up. And I thought, yeah, that's what it's going to look like. Or you see him shopping at like a farmer's market or something. Yeah. And I'm like, that's pretty utopian. I mean, that's just like helping somebody fall. That's like being a good human being. But sometimes that seems utopian in this world. So I like that, and I'm thinking a lot more, as you can hear at the end in the epilogue, about how do we create like other futures, like really sort of what we might think is utopian or spiritually utopian futures or greener futures. I think that's really important to try to like envision that. Because I do believe that we build the futures first through movies and stories, right? So like what we want right now apparently is this. That's what we're showing we want. And so because we show that, then we start to build that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's good to change that narrative maybe, or like what else could we start to build if our fantasy is what's going to help us inhabit the shapes of our future, then that becomes really important to, I think, artists and technicians and everybody. Yeah, all the way in the back.
The film last night after the game, and I found it really disturbing. You have a kind of dystopian vision. I found the movie really disturbing insofar as it seemed to break quite dramatically with what we've been talking about. But also that it's a more disturbing fantasy than that first appears, because although the mother seems to think that once Yang has died, the two parents can raise their child. That really isn't explored very much.
Yeah.
And then becomes this focus for exhibiting human compassion, human love, and human grief. And yet, the parents never really had interest other than adopting the child. They didn't have a lot of interest in teaching the child or learning about the child's culture or anything like that. It was all very superficial. What they wanted was someone to take care of their child, raise their child, and educate their child. And so they were creating a hierarchy in their lives, which we've seen again in Hanford history. Yep. In the 18th century, we would call that slavery.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And it portrays the parents as these benevolent beings, which in fact they aren't.
Mm-hmm.
They're participating in a big lie.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to comment a little bit.
Yeah, so just to bring everybody up to speed, if you didn't see the movie or know the story, there's this wonderful child named Yang, who's actually just a robot that these parents purchased to raise their adopted Chinese daughter. And because the robot is quote unquote Chinese and can teach all these fun facts to Mika and raise her, and the parents are kind of overworked and not there a lot. And both the story and the movie paints a very compassionate picture of these struggling parents. And now that Yang breaks down, this is the big crisis, Yang breaks down and can't be fixed. What are they going to do? How are they going to, they don't have time to raise their daughter. You know, what are they going, they're going to be stuck. And I think the point that you're bringing up is like, the parents are doing a horrible job of parenting, right? I mean, they've really outsourced their parenting to Yang, which also happens in the story. When Yang breaks down, the father in one scene realizes that he's reading Goodnight Moon to his daughter for like the first time in years. You know, he hadn't even thought about it. And that's kind of a pleasant thing to read a goodnight story to a child. Well, really, that's the critique of, we're making dinner, here's the iPad, you know, or yeah, I'll be right there. I just need to send a couple more emails. And then the kid wanders off, and gets on YouTube and watches YouTube videos of YouTubers talking about YouTubers. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, I think, as parents. I mean, I'm critiquing myself. I can see that. Obviously, I'm not like doing that all the time, right? I'm trying to engage. But that outsourcing to, well, digital online platforms, which we all did. We all had to do that, you know, especially I think about seniors in high schools in 2020 and 2021, that was like all online. And as parents, we were all online and had to be kind of like, okay, I hope things are working out. And they weren't at all. It was a shit show of an online learning experience there. But we didn't really engage as much as we could because we were all overwhelmed. And why were we overwhelmed? Because we all had to take care of our emails and our digital phones. And at the end of the day, we just wanted to scroll and relax a bit. So I'm constantly critiquing that, I think. And yet, as you can hear, I have strong opinions about it. Those strong opinions, I think, constantly have to be tempered by the human aspect. Parents are struggling. They are just trying to be good. They are, you know, in most of my stories, the hearts of the characters are good. They're trying to deal with, I guess, the villain. This is a little simplification of it, but I guess the villain is the technological, the heavy technological and advertised technological intrusions into our life. Now, is that true? I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but certainly that's what's playing out. And that, I think, is the horror that you're identifying there. Yeah.
You talked about having a human aspect when it comes to identifying with all these things. Have you ever read 1984 or that for me is like one of the biggest human clashes because of just how it's technically we passed the time. It's
yep.
not our future anymore,
yep.
but it's like it is one where human kindness is like, or like just humanity is just very not supposed to be there at all. How do you feel about that kind of clash where it's like hopeless in the end?
Yeah. You know, so there's somebody that I did read. Orwell was in my background. And so both 1984 and Animal Farm were playing out. Much like Kafka, I think, and Orwell share a similar vision in that it's very hopeless. Like they are dark cynics. And they're like, we are going to screw ourselves over by government intrusion, by, you know, just humanity is always going to act dark. And I disagree. Like I'm an optimist, but I keep getting thwarted by humanity. Like I say, you know, like that moment in the pandemic when everything shut down and like everything was quiet and it was actually quite frightening, totally terrifying and beautiful. Like suddenly the skies were clearing. Suddenly there was this like reset. There was this moment where we're like, okay, we could reset this whole industrial thing that we set up that's destroying the earth. And then we fought about toilet paper. And it's like, oh, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This, and then it just went downhill from there. I mean, you know, we went back into the clash and the fighting constantly. So my optimism, or I guess idealism, is always thwarted by reality. So in some ways, maybe Orwell's right, but I'm going to argue against Orwell again and again. I'm like, no, humanity can always win out, in my opinion. I'm much more hopeful in that way.
Yeah, that ending to the book was just, I hate it just because of like how all that just leads up to.
Yeah, and that's Orwell. That's Orwell. Orwell is always like Animal Farm. It doesn't matter. You can't escape. And that's what makes Orwell. But I disagree with him. Yeah, watching. Yeah.
I like to imagine a utopian future, a wonderful future where we can use technology to make our lives easier, rather than having it a centerpiece of everything. It's like, we don't have to work as much because the technology handles that. We can have our time whatever. But I also worry about like human selfishness and greed and corporations and everything. And I kind of just want to know what you think about human selfishness and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, so if we dig down, who's the villain here? We end up being the villains, I suppose, which is human greed, which is also driven, I think, by a capitalist or market economy. So that where does that go wrong? Look, one piece is if we could make a clean technology, which we haven't figured out fully yet because of the pit mining and all of these stuff that we need, and all the electricity. So we need to figure all that out, right? But let's just speculate that we figured it all out. So technology, you can't blame technology for like ruining the earth on any kind of environmental level. In fact, the technology is helping. It's giving us better clean water. It's giving us the electricity we need. It's doing it for free. It's the piece of the advertising and the marketers and the clickbait and the wanting us to get, like all these apps that want us to use them and then take our data and then sell it back to us in advertising to get subscriptions. That's the piece that needs to get, but without that right now, I think people in that industry would say, well, good luck. You can't have a free internet. You can't use our apps for free. We need this money to do what you want us to do. So that's the problem. But that's also a bit of a shady answer because they also want us addicted in other ways to make money. It's not like they're just like these altruists that are like, we make nothing from this. We just make this because we need that. No, they're making billions of dollars. So I would like to see a technology that does that, and also maybe a technology that frees us from the technology itself. This is a much more complex question. Like, I'm pro-nature, right? Like, I'm pro-nature, I'm pro-human interaction. And so I could see a VR or AR argument that, yes, but what about the incredible worlds we could create in virtual environments that would lead us to envision even more beautiful futures and see all kinds of awe-inspiring things? I'm less interested in that personally. Like, I'm kind of like, that's cool, but not if it comes at the expense of like our environment, the really beautiful pieces of our world disappearing. As an addition, awesome. If we're only there, that's where I think the problem starts to come in.
So you kind of answered part of this in her question, but so you build like these really dystopian worlds, and I think all of us here probably like dystopian as a fiction. I think most technologists who like build this kind of things think that they can develop it in a way that's better for society. You just have to get it right. It's like as long as you have all the variables correct, it's going to work out the way you want it to.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's so difficult to get the technology quite right so humanity benefits from it instead of like it just hurts?
Yeah, what's the ghost in the system, right? Like, what's the glitch? What's the problem? What's the computing error? We weren't getting it right before technology, right? I think it's us. Like, we haven't gotten over some really basic things like greed, jealousy, avarice, power, bloodthirst, aggression. all of that stuff. Open-heartedness, we haven't really fully figured that out yet. Like, that's not an interesting topic. You know, I mean, it's a super interesting topic. How do we open our hearts and have compassion and empathy and help those who are suffering? That's worth our time and effort. We haven't made that glitzy and glamorous yet. Like, I was just watching Euphoria. Anybody watch Euphoria? And I was like, that's the glitz and glamour, is like really bad behavior, really awful, like, you know, maybe it's true, maybe that's how people are feeling, but it's really dark. So as long as we glorify that, then I don't, you know, I think that's the glitch in the system, that we haven't worked through our own problems. And so we're hoping our technology will, but we're programming it. And so, I mean, now I'm just going to go into like super sci-fi, and this is already envisioned by people, but like, you almost need like a sect of like Zen Buddhist monks that are computer programmers that have already figured it out, and like, we'll take it from here, folks. You know, here's what your internet will now do. You know, it'll help you become enlightened or something like that. We're definitely not there. So I think, why haven't we yet? Because we have to search our own hearts and our ability to overcome those things.
So philosophy first, technology second.
I think so. I think so. And then we have to wait a little bit on our technology, because otherwise we're going to surpass our ability to process what we're creating. Should we do one last question? All the way back there, I saw your hand up. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask, and this may be a little basic, but do you believe that there's ever a point where utopianism runs out, and like, say we hit 1984's reality, right? That reality is, you know, revolution or suicide the only option, or is there actually a utopian you know, solution to that?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I believe in a utopian future. I'm really interested in actually like thinking forward into what are the problems of a utopian future. Like, if we all got open-hearted and enlightened, where would the new stories be for me? Like, you know, have I run out of stories? And I don't think so. I think we have to deal with like other next level issues of how do we then, well, one would be cleanup. How do we clean up the world, right? If we reach that, we have a lot of cleanup to do. And what do we do with politicians who have been kind of more or less useless for us for a long time? Like, we'll give them a broom and be like, please sweep up all this over here, you know, and let's bury the bobblehead dolls or something like that. So I think we will surpass, I hope we will surpass dystopian realities and start moving into these kind of questions of utopian futures. I see a lot of hands up. Let's do one more.
Okay. You mentioned that you had read Dune recently.
Yeah.
And that's like a very different sci-fi future where like, you know, AI went crazy. So like, no machine, no anything. It's all about like biology and like pushing the absolute limits of like intelligence. Like, what do you think about like a future like that, where it's almost like not technology, it's just like, you know, it is, but it's a very different thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's that kind of psychic realm that we're talking about, right? Where like that would be in this new kind of speculative, or, you know, obviously Dune did that. I think those are the problems. Again, and in many ways, it goes back to that question before, where's the problem? Well, it's in the avarice, it's in the warmongering, it's in the wanting to control that, what's it called again? Spice, right? Who controls the spice trade, right? Like, no matter, we have to give all that up to some degree. I mean, I feel like we see that right now in the Ukraine, you know, Russian invasion. Like, how long are we going to warmonger for? How long are we going to do this power struggle? How long are we going to keep taking and see that as a viable way, which it isn't, of interacting in any way, which is what Dune is multi-kingdom wars, you know, planetary wars. It's really just a parable for us right now, right? And so that's the question, like, can we overcome this? My idealism, my utopianism says yes. But, you know, the fiction that we're going to read right now, I think, is that you have to present a world that hasn't yet, because it's where we find ourselves. Thank you all so much for staying and talking. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to continue talking afterwards. Thank you.